And this is something that started in HIV vaccinology. Because there are these people in HIV called elite controllers who are able to control the progression of the disease. It doesn't go from HIV to AIDS without having antivirals. And so it was believed for a long time that, in fact, maybe true, that they're able to elicit these particular classes of broadly neutralizing, very potent HIV antibodies. And at least in some cases for elite controllers, that does seem to be the reason, right? But they're a tiny, tiny fraction of the population. And for a long time, HIV vaccinologists were like, let's try to get people to elicit these specific antibodies, and then we'll have a vaccine for HIV. The problem is these are extremely somatically hypermutated. So they're like 8, 10, 12, whatever mutations away from the germline naive version of the B cell to get to this antibody. It's a very torturous path to be able to elicit them. But the other problem is, like, fundamentally they believed, if I could have an immunogen that binds really well to this antibody, then I can elicit that antibody. And so they did a lot of like yeast display and stuff to try and find immunogens, like versions of the epitope, which is this like specific segment that is immunogenic and elicits the antibody. They're like tried various ways to to get these epitopes to bind better with their antibody of interest. And they're like, and then when we put this in humans, the best binding one is most likely to be able to elicit the antibody. As it turns out, very expensively, we found out that's not true. It turns out that binding is not a sort of complete representation of elicitation. It's in fact, they're quite different processes, right?
I'm curious, has it been like elucidated, like what's unique about is there anything unique about these people, or is it just like they got lucky?
There are lots of different hypotheses.
Okay.
And I'm not an HIV expert, but I think it's a very hard field because there are lots of things that I think are simultaneously true. And there's no one specific answer to the question of like what makes these elite controllers.
Yeah.
And so what happened is I think this exact thing, which was like, we have the antibody, now it should be easy. And then like 20 years later, no HIV vaccine, it's not that easy, right?
Yeah.